So welcome everyone to the third session of the four-part series, My Money and Me. Thanks for joining today. My name is Wanda Roberts and I'll be your host, and I'll do my best to facilitate this session as I will be presenting also. I'm currently the co-chair of the Financial Security for All Community of Practice through Extension, and I'm also part of Michigan State University Extension's Financial and Home Ownership team. So with the webinar today, we're going to talk about how people make decisions about money, basically focusing on behavioral economics. Talk about SMART goals, spending plans, and we'll get into more specifics about investing, particularly maybe the most appropriate ways to use certain vehicles for short and long-term goals. So just a few housekeeping items if you have not joined us before. Please be sure to add your first and last name, email address, the city and state that you're from into the chat pod. And if you want to receive AFCPE continuing education units, just type yes, CEU in the chat pod also. And please have a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil ready, because throughout the session we'll also do a money personality assessment. And Mark and I will do our best to monitor the chat pod and answer questions as we can during the session or at least after the session. And as long as you've entered your email address in the chat pod, we'll be sure to send you handouts. So Mark Robinson is again with us today, and he has 27 years of experience in the financial services industry. He's a Certified Investment Management Analyst and an accredited Investment Fiduciary Analyst. Quite a mouthful. He's provided investment-related advice and services to individuals, private trusts, as well as nonprofits. And he works with the Michigan Department of Licensing and Regulatory Affairs, investor education in your community. You might have that in your state. And he's the program creator and lead presenter for them. So Mark and I have partnered together with Michigan State University Extension and Investor Education to develop this My Money and Me series. So away we go. So in behavioral economics, if you might have heard some information about this, behavioral economics teaches us that people make decisions in a context, and that context matters as far as the choices we make relating to our money. And as the basis of behavioral economics is that there really are no neutral choices. So as we know, not making a choice really is a choice. So in general, it seems that making choices about money really kind of defy our expectations. People, we as humans, don't seem to be very rational. People like to gamble. We might spend more money on a vacation than we would if we were at home. And this irrationality isn't limited to certain communities or even income levels. But these irrational decisions can certainly have a greater impact on folks who don't have a lot of financial leeway. So in behavioral economics, we try to understand why people make certain choices and to learn how they can make better ones. So every decision is influenced by context, as I said. So I'm going to go over the key behavioral economic findings of behavioral economics. And the first one is the power of defaults. A default is a choice. It's something that someone chooses by not choosing. And because people may be procrastinators or just confused or reluctant to make a decision, the default option usually becomes the most common choice. We just don't do anything. Loss aversion. In general, people's perceived loss can be substantially greater than perceived gain. So in other words, someone feels worse about losing $20 than feeling happy about finding it. So people's choices can be skewed towards avoiding the possibility of loss. Interesting to think about specifically when we talk about investing for the future. Proliferation of choices. People tend to think more choices are better. But generally, when we're faced with multiple alternatives, we become overwhelmed and confused and are less likely to choose any of the options. I know it's something I've found, even going grocery shopping. I just really don't know how many kinds of mayonnaise there can be, but there are a lot of choices. Hassle factors. We as people are remarkably sensitive to hassles, even these minor ones, like if we have to walk an extra block or if we have to look up a phone number. So each hassle makes it less likely that we're going to do something. I mean, even if it's something that we really, really want, which is probably why many people join a gym and don't often even make it to the gym. Appealing to the right identity. We really think about ourselves in a variety of different ways. You may be a parent, a worker, a woman, and those particular labels we have for ourselves, well, we make different choices when we're in that situation and when we have that different identity. Short-term time frame. Short-term gains or losses are more powerful motivators than the anticipated later states of wealth. So we respond more strongly to a chance to get something now, today, rather than kind of be patient or invest for that bigger payoff down the road. Mental accounting. This is one I know I do all the time. People compartmentalize money into distinct categories, and they have different propensities to save or spend depending on how they're classifying their money. So someone might be really good at not touching rent money, but if they kind of find money or it's sort of spendable money in their checking account, they just don't have a plan for it and they'll just spend it. Yeah, it's interesting. George has a comment about that it seems to be that the proliferation, I can't even say it, of choices is in conflict with the hassle factor. Um, yeah, it can be. In general, I mean, the more choices we have, kind of overall, most people will eventually get confused and not make a choice. So the hassle factor actually, it's a hassle to have too many choices. So mental accounting, I mean, if you're one that says, this pot of money is for, spending on food and this pot of money is for rent, most people are pretty good at classifying their funds. Well, and many people think lotteries are fun. For most folks, it's appealing that there might be a chance to win something or, have a big potential payoff. It's generally more enticing than like a guaranteed smaller sum. So for the same cost, people might respond to a lottery-style bonus rather than matching funds. And again, think about how that impacts when an employer offers matching funds to invest in retirement. For some reason, people don't always identify with that. Yeah, that's true, Julia, especially when there ends up being so many choices. We might choose a whole bunch of things that don't make sense, and it's certainly not going to help us meet our goals. The last few behavioral economics concepts are peer influence. Like it or not, it appears most people are influenced by their peers rather than by experts. So those of us that are teaching financial education have an extra challenge. People are more likely to agree or identify with something if others agree with it too. And I know for me, I do teach financial education or money management classes, and it really is helpful to have that group interaction because folks then will, hear that somebody else sort of agrees with that or has had that experience. And so it's really helpful so we can keep folks on track. I had a class Monday night, actually, and the rumor that keeps popping up is if you keep a balance on your credit card, it'll build a better credit score. So it took quite a while to talk through that with folks to help them understand, it's paying on time every time, and carrying a balance is not what you should do to help build your credit score. But then the folks in the class helped to reinforce that, and so this group of people now know not to keep a balance on their credit card if at all possible. Yeah, exactly, Shannon. They can learn from each other in a group and reinforce what they've learned, and especially if it's in a workshop that happens over time. We do an 8-week money management course, so the folks get pretty comfortable with each other and support each other through that 8 weeks. All right. The best laid plans. Most of us are really well intentioned, but long-term goals, even though we know they're important, but in the immediate context, it's just more powerful. So someone might be saving for something, but it's hard to say no to something that's right in front of you right now. Or, you may really want to attend a program or go learn something or go to a workshop, but you might just be too tired, or there's a really good program on TV. So we really have good intentions for all the decisions we make about our money and everything else, but it certainly doesn't mean that's what comes to fruition. And lastly, cognitive load. Generally, when we're in an unfamiliar or uncomfortable situation, we seem to have kind of fewer mental resources for us to process information. So our best thinking or our best problem solving isn't really working at its peak performance. So decisions become even less likely, and they're more dependent on the outside context, which might be that peer pressure in a negative manner. I know I think about this, we've talked about this in money management class in terms of even reading the fine print. People feel so pressured and there's too much information. They'll just find things, and it can really get us in trouble. I'll have to check that out, George, and do a little research and check with some of my colleagues with Extension to see what is recommended, because I too would like to read more about behavioral economics. I do find it very fascinating, especially if we are working with others either individually in counseling or doing group sessions, or we're a financial advisor as a profession, to understand kind of what's really making people tick. So, are you guys ready? Need to have a paper and pencil, and we're going to go through the money personality assessment. So, what you need to do, each slide will have a group of questions. You need to read all the statements on the slide and then rank them from 1 that's least like you to 6 that's most like you. And just use each number once. So it might be 2, 4, 5, 6, kind of rank them. If you read a statement that you feel is absolutely not like you, just place a 0 next to it. And what I'd like you to do is, after you've finished ranking the questions on the particular slide, if you would just raise your hand, and then I'll move on when a majority of the folks have completed it. So, you can letter your papers A to F. Read these statements and rank them. Well, it looks like folks have got this one down. We're going to move on to slide number 2. Thank you. So keeping in mind needing to rank these 6 most like you to 1 least like you. And then raise your hand when have completed this slide. All right, moving on to the next slide. Yeah, and who knew you were going to have to do math on the webinar? As you'll probably have guessed, you'll have to add these up once we're done with the other 2 slides. All righty, moving on to the next slide. You guys are getting quicker as this goes along. Yeah, if I had gotten really good at this, I suppose I could have played some sort of like Jeopardy music. All righty, we got majority of the folks ready to go. Next slide. So this particular quiz, the money personality quiz, can really help you determine your money motivators or be able to use it with the folks if you work with others. One thing to keep in mind is that as we gain new insight into ourselves and others, that we don't really stereotype ourselves into a single category, because of course we are all very complex individuals. I believe this is the last slide. All righty. So those that have their questions scored, now you need to do the math. Add up the total for what you've put for all of the A's, the B's, the C's, and so forth. And then, of course, give me a hand raise when you have that calculated. So, depending on where your highest score is, and there might be a couple of the letters that are very close with their scoring, this would be your money personality. So if you're highest on the letter A, money is for security. You love to hold and save your money. You have a hard time spending money on luxury items or sometimes even on necessities. You save money because you believe money will offer protection from life's uncertainties. You're good at budgeting, prioritizing, and waiting until later to buy things. And you buy used goods whenever possible and always search for the lowest prices. And you track your spending and maintain a modest lifestyle. That's the description it gives us. So B, money is for pleasure. You love to spend money on whatever will make you happy. You can't keep money in your pocket. You have a hard time understanding there are limits on how much you can spend. You don't like saving, and you often borrow money from friends and family to spend now. And you're really generous with yourself and others because you enjoy life in the moment. You shop at prestigious stores, and you tend not to track expenses and buy on impulse. C, money is for happiness. You're devoted to looking good and buying the highest quality available. You think that having money and brand name things bring you happiness and contentment. You always wish you had a little more money and a few more things because then you'd be happier. You assume people can't be happy or successful without possessions. You are often the first to try new goods and services. Definition for D, money is unpleasant. You avoid money like the plague. Although you know money is a tool to use in the world, you'd rather not place a lot of importance on it. You would much rather be spending time and resources on doing other things, such as hobbies you enjoy, or sports, or theater, being outdoors, or just spending time with friends and family. E, money is power. It defines it as aspiring to make things happen. You view money as power and believe the most powerful people in the world are rich. The more money you have, the more you will be able to do anything you want. Money makes you feel in control of your life. You will take risks to have more money, and you will work hard to make money so you can enjoy power. F, money is self-worth. You measure self-worth by how much money you have. You think that people judge you about the amount of money that you have. Sometimes you feel guilty if you have more money than other people. You spend time calculating how much you should be paid for work. You feel better about yourself if you're doing something to make more money. You value how much you will have accumulated, not so much your relationships or contributions to the lives of others. So these particular categories are, at this point, something I've found are sort of the universal way that money is described as personality. Of course, take the parts that make sense to you, leave the rest. And just because you have a high number on a particular profile, it certainly might be, your most comfortable or go-to motivator. But obviously, as human beings, we kind of have all of these pieces that come out in how we make decisions about money. And actually, this particular money personality assessment came from a curriculum by the National 4-H Council called Financial Champions. So if you want more information about that, just put that in the chat pod and I can get it to you. But one of the handouts will be this personality. So if you left your email, I'll send that to you. So now we're going to talk a little bit about SMART goals. I'm assuming most of you have heard of the SMART concept of using or writing or focusing on goals. So for you, this will be a review. So in general, SMART stands for specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time-bound. And of course, you can use the SMART goal concept for writing financial goals or any kind of goals that you're looking to achieve. So, as an example, a poorly conceived goal might be, I want to save more money. And I do hear that a lot in the money management classes that I do. So more specifically, you might be able to say, I will save $1,500 for a family vacation by May 1st of 2014. So putting it into the SMART goal framework, it is specific. You know exactly how much you're going to need or you're wanting to save. It can be measured because either you've saved that much or you haven't. And it is attainable for your situation because you've looked at your spending plan or your budget and you know there is enough disposable income to be able to save it. And it's realistic. It's not like saying in 6 months you want to save $15,000. Maybe for some that could be realistic, but not generally. And it is time bound. There's a date that you want to complete this goal by. So as you think about writing SMART goals or working with people to help them look at creating SMART goals, focusing on being as specific as possible and not saying, well, I'll try or I should or I'll attempt to do this. Because again, it's not really specific enough to achieve a particular behavior. So also putting a time frame on it. I like that. Oh, well, when the cows come home. Folks might have not heard that expression. Maybe you use it, but that's one of the ones I grew up with. So as you think about creating your own SMART goal or working with others, really focus on helping them think through, is the goal actually specific? And can you actually measure the results? And is it realistic for their particular life circumstance? And does it actually have an end? I mean, even saving for retirement, saving, thus investing for retirement, has a particular goal or an end date. So we're going to have a little poll here. To bear with me to see if I can bring this up. So if you would take just a minute and share with us and all of those folks on the webinar, do you have a financial goal? And if yes, can you express it in a SMART type format? I can see folks are working on sharing their SMART goals. Pretty good, Doris. Can you be more specific? How often would you travel, to where, and when is retirement? Oh, pretty good, Karen. Hey, I'm going to go with Jan. She's going to travel to Ireland and Fiji. Good goal, and I think we all would think about in our, wanting to have a comfortable retirement, but trying to be more specific about what does that mean. Does it mean, like, how much money do we need? What kind of lifestyle are we going to have? Lots of folks talk about travel. This is really challenging. It's not like it's an easy thing to put goals into a SMART format and be really, really specific and accountable to ourselves and even to others. Look at Diane go. Yeah, I hear ya. Unless the furlough continues. See, Barb's also traveling. She's going to Ireland. Ireland seems to be a popular destination. Yeah, kids in college, that's a whole nother thing to be looking at of how to really set a goal, even to figure out how much it's going to cost and then what we have to do to get there. I'll give you another minute. You guys are just a bunch of travelers. Aruba, Ireland, Fiji. Pretty awesome. All right, I'm closing this chat pod. So as we can tell, it sounds like a really good idea for setting a SMART goal. And one of the handouts that you will receive after the session will be a worksheet or a chart that helps really think through each of those items and actually set a SMART goal for whatever you may be wanting to do. But also part of that is that we really need to have a good handle on our spending plan or budget. Not sure if I got on my little soapbox about that, but I like to call it a spending plan. When I think of budget, I think of diet. I don't really want to go on a diet, so I prefer to have a spending plan because we all do need to spend in one way, form, or another. And in, I believe it was the first session, Mark, we talked about the inflow and outflow, or like the income and expense statements. If those of you are on this webinar and did not attend the first one, just type that into the chat pod because I will include these handouts when I send them after the session. But we really need to have, a specific, clear understanding of what is coming into our household and really what's going out. And as you can probably imagine, what's going out is usually quite a challenge. Oh, I got too clicky. All right, I need to give y'all another question. So if you guys would share, what are the benefits of having a spending plan, aka budget? Yep, benefits of having a plan of how we are going to spend our money. Control and peace of mind, certainly. Yep, knowing really what we can spend and do we have any discretionary spending. Yeah, maintaining good credit's one of them. Monday night we talked all about credit. And it's really, really important, as we know. It's not just about maybe paying a really, lower or decent interest rate when we borrow money, but our credit score has a huge impact on all kinds of other aspects of our life, including sometimes getting a job. You guys know this stuff. Thank you for sharing. All right. So, you guys listed all of the awesome benefits of a spending plan. So thinking about having a spending plan and thinking about behavioral economics and thinking about our personality, I'm going to ask, are you in control? Let me make it a little bigger. A little poll for you to see if you're in control or almost in control or somewhat in control, out of control as it relates to your money. Self-assessment. Interesting. So when you think about being in control of your money, you can also think about how you might answer these questions. So, does your money seem to disappear before the next paycheck? Do you wonder where your money went? Do you have difficulty paying for basic needs like food or transportation? Or do you need to borrow money to cover expenses each month? Do you pay some bills late every month? Do you receive collection notices for past due bills? Do you only pay the minimum on your credit accounts? Or do you have trouble finding money for gifts and holiday shopping when that comes up? So those are other things to consider as we think about how we may be in control or how our money is controlling us. That's a good question, Shannon. What's a minor emergency? But thus, it's back to the whole point of all of this is so individual. And I know as I'm teaching money management class, folks a lot of times want me to sort of give them an answer of what's the right thing to do. And as we all know, it really is all individual for that household, for that person. What's their goal? What's their income situation? There's lots of factors. And thanks, Barb. Barb shared a book on Behavioral finance. Folks want to check that out. So a spending plan. Let's get down to actually see if we can define what exactly is it? How would you describe it? If you're talking to a friend or talking to a client. That's a good way to put it, Anna. How you might distribute your earnings. Yeah, and as we know, there's lots of ways to try to explain this. One of the keys I see that Shannon put down is that I think is important is that it's a written document. Because lots of folks that I work with might, kind of have a plan or some idea or some ways that they make decisions, but if we can actually get it written down, as we know, it usually becomes a more impactful tool for folks. Yep, a written plan for spending and saving money, and of course that written plan that includes what income comes in so we know what we can spend and save. Thank you, everyone. So as we go along and think about how do we even create a real spending plan that is realistic for our household, one of those ways, of course, is to track spending. Could be for a week, could be for a month. I've worked with folks who have, done it for 6 months or a year. That's quite a thing. Um, yeah, as Shannon points out, if things are sort of just in your head, it might work a little bit, but it certainly isn't going to be as clear and be able to reach your goals unless it's written down. So, tracking your spending. Question for oop, question for you all. Have you ever tracked your spending? And so tell us how you did it and for how long you did it. One of the things that I assign as homework in money management is to ask people to use a little notebook and write down, at least for 7 days, absolutely everything they buy, from a bottle of water at a gas station to, filling up their tank with gas, and things they might not think about. And actually, I also ask them to write down if it's a want or a need. People who have done it seem to get a lot of benefit. So some of you have done a little notebook for a month. I mean, that's awesome. You think about how much that takes to write down every single penny you spend for an entire month. Yep, some folks are doing it, with software. Actually, one of the things as I'm thinking out loud about it, I'm assuming there's got to be an app on a phone that would be very helpful for folks that have smartphones. So Maria says she's tracked the spending for the longest time in Excel, but it really hasn't changed her habits. But that might tell me that you probably already have good habits to start with, which then is just a reinforcing mechanism. Yep, Mint.com. Lots of folks like Mint. I usually tell people though to make sure that they're comfortable with having the app, connect to their bank account if you're doing it that way. Some people are really good with that. Lots of good ideas. It really is, I'm assuming, as you guys have, those who have tracked your spending, is a real eye opener and can make a really big impact. I know one of the tools I used when my son was like 16, he had a credit card, and that's the way he got his allowance and spent his money. And the summer, during the summer when he was going over and looking at all the statements, it was really, it just jumped right out at him when he looked at me and said, "Well, Mom, I'm spending a lot of money on food." Now, he probably wouldn't have realized that if it hadn't been on this entire list, on a credit card statement that said McDonald's, Taco Bell, and KFC. But that's generally one of the things teens spend most of their money on. And of course, I did mention a little bit earlier briefly about the wants versus needs. That's always a challenge for, I know, for even myself or individuals we work with. It's just another piece that goes into creating a real appropriate spending plan. So besides looking at money personality, besides considering behavioral economics, we really need to be clear because wants and needs aren't necessarily, as we know, the same for each person or each family or each household. Question for you all on paying your bills. If you'd be willing to share the process of how your household pays the bills. Is it electronic, one person? Kind of describe how you do it. It looks like most folks are doing online bill pay things. And if folks can get that set up, it is a beautiful thing. I know it's something currently that I'm actually helping my mother-in-law with, who's almost 87 and, of course, needs assistance with making sure everything's paid appropriately, and setting up electronic bill pay has been wonderful. Dividing the bills, sharing it with others in the household, or sharing the task. Thank you, everyone. So the other challenge as we look at creating a spending plan that actually works for a household are many folks need to consider variable income and non-monthly expenses. So it could just be variable income, meaning, people either work seasonally or they work overtime now and then, or they might work strictly on commission. What a challenge to try to figure out how to create a spending plan. And even non-monthly expenses. I know one of the things that for quite a while seemed to escape me was to remember the license tabs that would be due on the vehicles. So even at $100 a shot, if you don't have enough discretionary income, that pops up, and then kind of like where are you going to get that from? So other non-monthly expenses, I know things that I've budgeted for are even taking the dog to the vet when you got to get all of the medications. I mean, it could be a $300 visit. So strategies for managing these non-monthly expenses. Do you guys have some strategies? What do you do? If you help others, what advice do you give them? That's interesting, Julia. Mark and I are looking at that curveball fund. Pretty cool. Yeah, when life throws you a curveball, you've got that little, people call it an emergency fund, sitting over there that hopefully can save you. That allow for and distribute those costs across the various months. I know I used to do that with my son when he was in high school and say needed to go to some sports camps in the summer. I mean, some of those are like $500 a pop. So knowing that, just putting monthly enough funds in there so it's available when we need to pay that. And I think, I mean, in general, people are saying it too. It's sort of like this emergency fund. That's sort of the mantra that we say. And at this point, what I've learned is not only now do we need an emergency fund, but to really define that. So is it an emergency fund that's say $2,000 to $5,000 to maybe replace an engine in a car, or to get a new washer or dryer if that goes, or is it actually an emergency fund to replace income, which is a whole nother 3 to 6 months used to be, and we know it really needs to be a whole lot more than that. But as we talk about a bit later, and we'll talk about in the final session, is it really just depends on what kind of emergency fund you have, thus what financial product would be most appropriate to use. Thanks, everyone. And then, of course, goes without saying, but we do need to, if we have a spending plan, writing it down and saying done, of course we know just is not the way to go. We have to look at this regularly, be it monthly, quarterly. Actually, my husband and I have set up Saturdays at noon. We kind of have this standing date to just review and talk about the household's finances. Maybe you don't need to do it once a week. Of course, I like talking about it, but it does need to be looked at on some sort of regular basis. So now I'm going to turn it over to Mark, and we can go through, Mark, a few of these. We'll see we do have quite a bit more information about the investing piece. So we'll do our best to be done by 1. And if we don't get through it all, we will then also continue it on the last webinar session in 2 weeks. All right. Thanks, Mark.
All right, and thank you all. Tremendous information by Wanda on setting up a spending plan, pushing off those pennies into important places, and having SMART goals set up for achieving that. Many of these are what we refer to as money-related goals. In other words, they're tied one way or another to investing or saving or having access to money. And for the sake of not compressing some very good information into too short of a time without losing any content, some of this I will be pulling into the final session in, I believe it's 2 weeks, Wanda, or next week? In 2 weeks. But I'd like to get through at least the first 15 minutes of this. And let's start by taking your goals and assigning a time frame to them. And the reason we're doing that is that what we want to do is match up short-term goals with short-term investments, intermediate-term goals with intermediate-term investments, and of course, long-term goals with long-term investments. Here's some examples of a poorly conceived SMART goal. I want to save more so I can pay off a few things and invest more for retirement. Well, that's an attaboy or an attagirl there, but it's not well conceived because it doesn't follow, as we've learned, the SMART goal protocol, which is we need to be a lot more specific. So in reading through this, you can certainly see that we are identifying timelines, specific dollar amounts, and this would certainly be categorized as a SMART goal. So investing, how does it fit into your spending plan? For those money-related goals, it could be several different ways. It could be, first of all, to pay off debt. Who cares what the stock market is doing if you have credit card debt that you're servicing at 18, 19, or 20%? Saving for short-term goals that may require what we would call must-have money available now. We might put that in something to where we would be able to preserve the principal of that. And then, of course, we can put the money at risk and hoping that in the intervening time between when we set the goal and when we might actually need money or bring that goal to fruition, maybe we can get higher rates of return. And we can seek those higher rates of return through investing. Let's do a quick case study here. This individual or couple has $60,000 in annual income. They've gone through the course, and the new budget leaves them with an extra $400 per month, making minimum monthly payments of $125 on a $5,000 credit card, not contributing to the 401k, and they have $11,800 in emergency funds. Now, we are going to go to a poll and ask you the question, what should be done here? Pay off credit card debt, invest in the 401k, save for an emergency fund? Well, there's not enough information. Now, we've heard that pay off debt first is always the smart thing to do. And the answers thus far have been almost unanimous, nearly unanimous, on paying off credit card debt. But I want you to regard this not as just an either or, and in this case, pay off the credit card debt, which probably is the default answer and certainly isn't going to get you in trouble, but it may cost you opportunity if we have other goals that require funding out 10, 20, 30 years from now. In other words, that bag of groceries that we all will be needing 20 or 30 years from now. So let's look at this. I'm going to say there's not enough information. Let's look at the credit card. They're making the minimum monthly payment of $125, and at making the minimum monthly payment, it's going to take them about 20 years or so to pay that off, and they'll pay $6,900 in interest. The company is matching 50% on the first contribution. So in the hierarchy of money, free money, I think, is at the top. Perhaps monies with a favorable tax treatment would be number 2, and number 3 is the money we have to work for. So if you have a company that is matching, we want to find some way to participate in that. And the emergency funds equal 2.5 months of net earnings. Let's see if we can't do something a little bit different here. So let's look at an either or on this. We could take the $400 and pay down the credit card. So that'd be paid off in 11 months. So instead of paying $6,900 in interest, the interest paid would be $436. We could take the $400 and contribute that to the company 401k, and the annual contributions that this individual would be making would be matched with $2,400 from the employer. Or we could put the $400 into the emergency fund, and using generally accepted metrics, maybe that 2.5 months of savings isn't enough, and depending on the type of income, whether it is reliable income or variable intermittent income, or they're in consulting in a cyclical industry, maybe they need to have 3 or 4 or 5 or maybe even 6 months saved up. So there's the either ors, and I just want you to look at those and say, you know what, every one of those in isolation might make sense, but maybe in the aggregate we could find a better way to look at this. Now, of course, this is just an example here, but it's to get you thinking that often a combination, and just that you're thinking about it, and that you've gone through the process of budgeting, and that you have saved the extra $400 in this case study, has taken you such a long way. So let's find another way to slice and dice. This is a 24-month example. Let's take of that $400, $130, and get working on that credit card debt here. So instead of taking 273 months or 11 months, you pay it off in 24 months, and your interest paid in doing that is $965. Let's take $120, which really, keep in mind this is net money, is really like $170 of gross pay, and let's contribute that into the 401k. So over a 24-month period of contributions, That's $4,080 with company matching of $2,000. There's the free money we didn't want to leave on the table. And by just adding $120 or gross of $170, look at the result of that over a 24-month period. And then we can add the remainder of this, the balance of $150, into the emergency fund, and over a 24-month period, we bumped it from $11,800 to $15,400. Now, that, just looking at that, makes a lot of sense to me because we're working on all things here. We're working on the debt. We're working that down. That's an immediate overhang that creates a tremendous amount of drag. We don't have the emergency fund or the curveball fund or however you want to regard it. But we've also taken care of the immediacy and have also taken care of the future. So in a way, we're taking care of our present self while acknowledging the importance of taking care of our future self by putting the $120 into the 401k. So over the next 12 months, because we're not making the credit card payment anymore, we can take that $255 and contribute another $160 or $230 gross into the 401k. So now we really have moved that to the front burner, and we're making an annual contribution of around 6%, which is getting close to where perhaps we ought to be at a 10% or better. But keep in mind where we were on this. No contributions whatsoever, and we can save an additional $95 for the emergency fund. Now, all I want you to do here is not get so hung up on the numbers as much, but to regard this as more of a holistic approach on taking care of immediate needs, taking care of the debt overhang, while at the same time taking care of our future selves here. So we've gone through a 36-month process here, and here's where we end up with just the decision to save $400 a month. At the end of the 36 months, we have no credit card debt, and presuming that you are not going to use the credit card, you'll have a zero balance and zero interest payments. You'll have a 401k that you've made $13,000, $320 in total contributions, and the employer has put in over $4,000 into that. And you'll have an emergency fund that equals almost 4 months. Now, going from a pretty dire set of circumstances just 36 months prior to this, look where we are after 36 months. Now, comment on this. To get to that space of where you're not able to save for a 401k, you have credit card debt. That is not the result of the last, well, let's say less smart decision you made. It's a compounding of less smart decisions over a multiple year period that gets you in that space. So to work out of that requires a different way of thinking. Typically, the type of thinking that gets you into trouble is not the thinking that gets you out of trouble. A balance sheet, or excuse me, a spending plan was put together, an analysis of where the monies were being spent, and someone decided to make the decision to take control over their money and start making more informed decisions and taking more informed actions. And in doing so, has themselves 36 months later in a pretty good space. I think what I'm going to do is bookmark this here, Wanda, because I think this will tie in very well with next week. And so let's move this over into a question phase at this point. And so we can summarize this as that we have gone through the establishing of goals, writing those out, coming up with a way whereby we have a spending plan for either the saving of or the spending of to achieve these money-related goals. And we have looked at ways whereby through that we can make some real difference in what our own personal balance sheet looks like. Next week, in 2 weeks, excuse me, what we are going to do is put this into the context of a sequence for making investment decisions. And I'll give you just a highlight on this today. You'll need to know where you're going. In other words, what my goals are, how much time you have to reach each goal, and then we'll look at establishing what we would call an investment objective. So what are my goals? my investment objective. In other words, that boils down to how am I going to go about doing this to reach my goals, those that require money. The time is a very important factor when it comes to matching up the right type of investment to meet short-term goals and the right type of investments for meeting longer-term goals, which comes down to how do you allocate your money between growthier investments like stocks and then fixed income investments, bonds, and of course cash. And then the last part in the sequence, which is often where we focus on first, are the specific investments. If you are clear and in control over what your goals are and have stated written objectives on how you are going to reach those written goals and have established an investment objective for each of those goals and have allocated in accordance with those investment objectives, which again we'll get into in 2 weeks, you will see that the specific investments and the quibbling over what stock fund or what individual security should go into the portfolio is the last critical step in all of this, and perhaps the least important step in all of this. So let's open this up to questions at this point, and then we'll bookmark this and fold this into the last part of the presentation with no loss of content, but I think we can maintain a better context if we bring it into next week.
2 weeks. Thanks, Mark. I did type in there that the last webinar will be held on Wednesday, October 23rd, 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Got a couple people typing. Huh, that's a good question, George. Secret word for AFCPE, Continuing Education Unit? Are you talking about log it in? Or just what we should call them? Looks like it's kind of an inside joke there, guys. Oh, thanks, Diane. But as long as the folks have entered their email address and name, first and last, I do send out AFCPE CEU certificates. Glad you're straight, George. Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone, for attending the webinar today. Hopefully you found it helpful. And please join us on October 23rd for the last in the 4-part series. Everybody have a good day. Thanks.